What do you do about societies where all these things are in place, but it would appear that most of the people living in them are totally fine with all of that? They're fine with press restrictions. They're fine with the Justice Department, whatever you call it, that is somewhat the handmaiden of political power. Meaning, unlike Iran, where there's quite huge discontent, or Poland, where there was, and even Brazil, where there was like huge discontent with Bolsonaro. In the United States, there will be huge discontent. But what do you do in a society like India and elsewhere where, yes, of course, there's opposition and discontent, but it would seem to be that most people are kind of on board with this. They're not sitting there going, oh, well, a liberal democracy. They're kind of sitting there going, our lives are getting better, material prosperity. This is a strong person. What does one do about that part?
The most disturbing part about Modi's Hindu nationalism and illiberalism is not that he puts it forward, but that it works and that it gets him elected. And the same is true of Erdogan, and the same you could say is true of Orban. Look, I think it shows you that some of these cosmopolitan, liberal, democratic values are not universally held, or the way I would put it is a lot of people don't realize how important they are to the functioning of modern, open, democratic societies. That they think, freedom of the speech sounds good, except for the speech I really don't like. That should be banned. Independent judges are a great idea, except when judges rule against the things I believe in which case the government should just, get rid of the judges. And that's a very common feature. As you know, Zach, many times people have done polls in the United States asking people whether they believe in some aspect of the Bill of Rights. And it turns out, depending on how you phrase the question, majorities of Americans basically don't agree with most of the Bill of Rights. So, in my view, that's exactly why they were put into the Constitution. The founders were clever enough to realize that you needed to have anti-majoritarian elements within any functioning liberal democracy. Well, what is the Bill of Rights? Basically, it's a set of things that you say, despite the fact that a majority may want to do this, you can't do it, right? That is the fundamental nature of the Bill of Rights. It says, I don't care what the majority wants. You cannot abrogate freedom of speech. You cannot abrogate freedom of worship. You cannot engage in unreasonable search and seizure. All that is anti-democratic in a sense. So I think that a properly functioning liberal democracy has to have some anti-democratic features. And I would also add, just as a caveat, though I agree with your basic point, even Modi, remember, I think got at his peak 35% of the vote because of the first past the post parliamentary system that translated into 60% of the seats in parliament. But 70% of Indians did not vote for, 65% of Indians did not vote for Narendra Modi's party. It's not entirely fair to say in many of these cases that they have a majority of the country. They have a very significant plurality.
Isn't there also the economic trade-off for Maslow's hierarchy of needs trade-off going on there as well, like with China, where at a certain point, free speech doesn't put bread on your table. But if an autocratic leader or a approaching autocratic leader is, then people are willing to make that trade.
Yeah, and China is the perfect example of it. But remember the degree to which China has delivered on the economic side, which people forget. China's per capita GDP, average income in China, has gone up 9-fold in the last 40 years. I mean, that's staggering, right? That is extraordinary. But I think it's important to point out, as a proponent of liberal democracy and as a proponent of the messiness and of democracy, it is not necessary. Give you a simple example. South Korea's per capita income in 1950 was half that of India's. Today, South Korea's per capita income is 35 times that of India's. South Korea and Taiwan are probably the two greatest economic success stories of the last 40 years. And they are both, during that period, were run by messy democratic systems without strong leaders. All the things people say, let's give Modi, let's give Erdogan, let's give Bolsonaro this. At least they were strong leaders. You didn't have that in South Korea and Taiwan. And those countries clobbered virtually everybody else in terms of the economic performance of those two nations. So I think in the short term, it often looks like having a strong leader helps. But in the long run, it almost has never worked out.